Young homeless woman was alone on Christmas at a bus stop until the billionaire's daughter insisted on taking her home.
The smoke still rose, lazy and cruel, dancing among the ruins of what had once been a dream. Selena stood on the wet sidewalk, arms crossed against the December cold, eyes fixed on the charred beams that had once held up the ceiling of the small restaurant. That place had a simple name, Taste of Home, and now it was nothing but ash and burned memories. She wasn't crying, not anymore. The tears had run dry in the early morning hours when the firefighters finally left the building and said there was nothing more to be done. Now all that remained was the heavy silence of loss and the question hammering inside her chest, what now? Every floorboard, every pot hanging on the wall, every recipe tested to exhaustion, it had all been built with her own hands. Selena hadn't inherited anything. She had no wealthy family, no influential godparents, no safety net waiting for her. The restaurant was everything. It was the place where she proved, every single day, that she was worth something, that she was capable, that she could turn flour, butter, and care into something that made people smile. But now, standing before that skeleton of blackened wood, the only thing she felt was emptiness. An emptiness so vast, it seemed capable of swallowing all of Seattle whole. The insurance didn't cover even half the damages. The call with the insurance company had been brief, cold, bureaucratic. "We're sorry, Ms. Swanson, but your policy doesn't include fires caused by electrical failures that existed prior to coverage." Prior. As if she had chosen that. As if she hadn't worked 16 hours a day to pay every bill, every supplier, every cent of rent. The debts were still there, solid as stones in her stomach. And the worst part? There was no one to call, no shoulder to lean on, no safe harbor. She had always been good at being alone, or at least pretended to be. In the days that followed, Selena tried to maintain her dignity. She slept on the couch of a church acquaintance for 2 nights, until she realized she was imposing. Then she went to a temporary shelter, where she shared space with other lost souls, each carrying their own broken story. At night, lying on a thin mattress that smelled of disinfectant, she would close her eyes and imagine the smell of bread coming out of the oven, the sound of the door opening, the smile of a satisfied customer. But when she opened her eyes, all she saw was the cracked ceiling and the harsh glare of the fluorescent light. Do I even know who I am without that place?
She looked for work, handed out resumes at bistros, diners, coffee shops. But December isn't a hiring month. It's a month for closing out the year, cutting costs, waiting for January. "We'll call you," they said. No one called. Selena felt her pride shattering with every no, every pitying look, every awkward silence. She, who had once run an entire kitchen, was now begging for a chance to wash dishes. And the worst of it all was the fear. That sneaking fear that grew during sleepless nights. The fear of never getting back up. Of never again feeling like she belonged anywhere. On Christmas morning, Selena woke before dawn at the shelter. Everyone was still asleep. She put on the thickest coat she had, a gray overcoat worn at the sleeves, and slipped out the back door without making a sound. She couldn't stand the thought of spending the whole day inside listening to well-meaning prayers and forced smiles. She needed air. She needed to feel the cold on her face and remember she was still alive, even if everything inside felt frozen. The streets were deserted, decorated with Christmas lights blinking cheerfully, indifferent to her pain. Selena walked aimlessly, hands stuffed in her pockets, until she found an empty bus stop. She sat down on the freezing metal bench and closed her eyes. Breathe, Selena. Just breathe. But it was hard to breathe when her chest felt full of shards. She didn't know how long she sat there motionless, listening to the wind howl between the buildings. She didn't know that just a few feet away, A little girl with curious eyes was walking hand in hand with her father, and that this encounter, as unlikely as it was necessary, was about to rewrite everything.
The voice came before the figure, small, clear as crystal, full of that impossible certainty only children have. "Daddy, look! She's cold!" Selena opened her eyes slowly, still half lost between exhaustion and the mental fog that had followed her for days. Before her, a girl with brown curls and impossibly bright eyes watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. She wore a puffy red coat, wool gloves, and an expression so genuine it hurt to look at. Behind her, a tall man with broad shoulders and a serious expression held the child's hand with protective firmness. He was looking at Selena too, but differently, as if he were calculating, measuring, trying to figure out what to do with this unexpected scene. Selena felt her face grow hot. Shame rose like a warm wave, burning in her cheeks, her neck, the tips of her ears. She knew how she must look. Disheveled hair escaping from her beanie, dark circles under her eyes, wrinkled clothes. A woman alone at a bus stop, on Christmas, with nowhere to go. What kind of picture is this? She wanted to stand up, wanted to say something that sounded normal, casual, but the words stuck in her throat. She could only manage a smile, a trembling, fragile smile that fooled no one. The little girl took a step forward, releasing her father's hand with that spontaneous boldness of children who haven't yet learned to fear the world. "Don't you have anywhere to spend Christmas?" the little one asked, and the question held no malice, just that disarming frankness that makes adults fall apart. Selena blinked, feeling her eyes burn, and for a moment didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Melanie," the man's voice came low but firm. It wasn't a scolding, just the kind of gentle correction from someone trying to preserve another's dignity. He moved closer, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and his eyes met Selena's. They were gray eyes, serious but not cold. There was something there, recognition perhaps, or weariness, as if he too knew the weight of carrying something invisible. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "She's too curious sometimes." But there was hesitation in those words, as if he himself didn't quite know what to do. Selena shook her head, trying to seem more whole than she really was. "It's okay. She's sweet." But Melanie beamed, as if she just received a gold star compliment. "See, Daddy, I'm sweet." And then, turning to Selena with that determination impossible to ignore. "My name is Melanie Davenport, and you need somewhere warm. We have one."
The silence that followed was strange, not uncomfortable, but heavy, as if fate itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Adrian Davenport, because that was the man's name, though Selena didn't know it yet, looked at his daughter, then at the woman sitting on that cold bench, and something inside him stirred. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something else. Maybe it was the memory of his own loneliness. Maybe it was his dead wife's voice echoing in his mind. Always help those who need it. Always. Or maybe it was simply the fact that Melanie, with that inexplicable intuition, seemed to know something he couldn't yet name. "Look," he began, his voice a bit softer now. "I know this is going to sound strange, but it's Christmas, and you're clearly not okay." He paused, as if wrestling with himself. "We live near here. I have a penthouse with plenty of space, food, heat. You could spend the day with us. No strings attached, no obligation. Just so you don't have to be alone today." Selena froze. Her first instinct was to refuse. "Of course not. I don't accept charity. I'm not that kind of person." But then she looked into the little girl's eyes, so full of hope, and felt something break inside her. Something hard and proud that she'd been holding too tightly for too long. And for the first time in a long while, Selena let someone see her. Not just the broken shell, not just a lost woman, but the person who was still fighting underneath it all to believe she deserved more. She swallowed hard, felt her voice tremble when she finally answered, I don't want to be in the way." Adrian shook his head, and a slight smile, perhaps the first in months, touched the corner of his lips. "You won't be." Melanie had already grabbed Selena's hand, pulling her to her feet with that uncontrollable energy. "Come on, you're gonna love the Christmas tree, and we have hot chocolate." And as Selena stood up, still dazed, still unable to believe what was happening, the world seemed to tilt slightly, as if an invisible door had just opened.
The penthouse was everything Selena imagined it would be, and at the same time, nothing like what she expected to feel. Glass, steel, light wood, a panoramic view of Seattle that looked torn from an architecture magazine. But there was something else. Silence. Not the welcoming silence of a home, but that kind of stillness that weighs heavy, that fills the corners, that makes it clear life once existed here, and now something is missing. Melanie ran through the living room with the ease of someone who knows every inch of the space, but Adrian simply set his keys on the marble counter and looked around like someone who still hadn't gotten used to his own house. Selena stood frozen in the entryway, hands clasped in front of her body, feeling completely out of place. "Make yourself at home," Adrian said, his voice polite but distant. He took off his coat and hung it carefully, every gesture measured, controlled. "There's a guest room down the hall. You can take a shower, rest, whatever you need." Selena just nodded, not quite knowing what to say. How do you thank someone for something like this? How do you accept generosity without feeling like an intruder? She followed Melanie down the hallway, and the little girl opened the door to a spacious room with an enormous bed covered in pristine white sheets and a window that looked out onto the gray of the cloudy sky. "Here! You're staying here!" Melanie announced proudly, as if she'd prepared everything herself. And then, with that brutal honesty of children, "It's been a long time since anyone slept here. I think the house was missing someone." Selena took the longest shower of her life. She let the hot water wash away not just the dirt, but also some of the exhaustion that seemed to have seeped into her bones. When she emerged, wrapped in a soft robe that smelled of lavender, she found clean clothes folded on the bed. Sweatpants, a wool sweater, thick socks, all new, tags still on. Did he have these bought? Did he have them stored away? It didn't matter. She put everything on with a mixture of gratitude and shame, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked human again. She looked like someone who could still try. When she returned to the living room, she found Adrian in the kitchen, stirring pots with the expression of someone who clearly doesn't know what he's doing. Melanie sat on the counter, swinging her little legs, and when she saw Selena, she shouted, "Daddy's trying to make turkey, but I think he's gonna burn it." Adrian turned around, one eyebrow raised in good-natured defiance. "Hey, I'm not going to burn it. I'm just, improvising." Adrian couldn't hold back his laughter, a small, rusty laugh, but genuine. And then, without thinking much, without asking permission, she moved closer. "Can I help?"
Something shifted in that instant. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring not just the offer, but the woman behind it. And then, with a sigh that seemed like relief, he stepped away from the stove and made an open gesture. "Please, be my guest." Selena felt a familiar tingle rise up her arms, the call of the kitchen, the place where she'd always known exactly who she was. She assessed the ingredients with a trained eye: turkey, potatoes, carrots, basic seasonings. Nothing fancy. But it was enough. It had always been enough. She rolled up her sleeves and began to work, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was doing something, not just surviving. Selena's hands moved with precision, with muscle memory, with love.
She seasoned the turkey with rosemary, garlic, and a touch of Dijon mustard. She browned the potatoes in butter until they were crispy on the outside and tender inside. She made cranberry sauce from scratch, adding a bit of orange to balance the tartness. Melanie watched her, mesmerized, asking 1,000 questions. Why do you close your eyes when you taste? How do you know when it's good? Can I lick the spoon? And Selena answered with patience, feeling something inside her warm up. Adrian kept his distance, but she could feel his gaze. Not intrusive, just present. As if he were seeing something he hadn't expected to see. Something that made him remember. When the table was set and the plates were served, the silence that fell over that room was no longer heavy. It was reverent. Adrian cut the first piece of turkey, brought it to his mouth, and closed his eyes. Selena held her breath, and then she saw it. A tear rolling down his face, so unexpected that he himself seemed surprised. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just chewed slowly, like someone savoring not just food, but memory. "This is," he began, his voice hoarse, "this is the first thing that's made me feel at home since—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Selena understood. And in that instant, something passed between them, a silent connection, fragile but undeniable. Melanie, oblivious to the intensity of the moment, clapped her little hands on the table and exclaimed, "You're the best cook in the whole world! You're gonna stay with us forever, right?" And Adrian, still with moist eyes, looked at Selena in a way that made her heart race. As if for the first time, he was seeing not a stranger he'd helped out of pity, but someone who perhaps could fill the emptiness he carried. He cleared his throat, composed himself, and when he finally spoke, his voice was firm. "What if this wasn't just for today? What if you stayed as a chef, for the house, with a salary, with housing?" Selena froze, fork still in the air, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. And for the second time that impossible day, she found herself facing a choice that could change everything.
The first few days were strange. Selena would wake up in the guest room with the feeling she was living someone else's life. Someone who had a roof, guaranteed meals, a purpose. She moved through the kitchen with the caution of someone who still couldn't believe she could stay, preparing elaborate breakfasts, balanced lunches, dinners that filled the house with aromas that hadn't lived in that space for a long time. Adrian worked in the upstairs office, endless calls, virtual meetings, numbers and strategies she didn't understand. But every night, promptly at 7, he came downstairs, and always, he made a point of having dinner at the table with Melanie, and now with Selena too. Melanie was the glue holding everything together. She invaded the kitchen every afternoon, climbing onto her stool to help, or hinder, depending on your perspective. "Can I crack the eggs? Can I stir? Can I taste?" Selena would laugh, let the girl participate, teach her little tricks, how to fold croissant dough, how to feel when caramel was ready, how to season with confidence and not fear. And Melanie absorbed everything with that hunger to learn that only children have. But there was another hunger there too, a hunger for attention, for presence, for something she clearly missed. "Did my mom like to cook?" she asked once, her voice small. Selena froze, knife suspended over the cutting board. "I don't know, sweetie, but I'm sure she loved you very much." Melanie nodded, too serious for her age. "Daddy doesn't talk about her. I think it hurts too much." And then, slowly, the house began to breathe again. Mornings had sound. The clatter of pots, Melanie's laughter, the aroma of fresh bread coming from the oven. Adrian started coming downstairs earlier, claiming he needed coffee before his meetings, but Selena noticed that he stayed, leaning against the counter, cup in his hands, just watching. Not invasively, but with a contained curiosity, as if he were trying to understand how she transformed simple ingredients into something that made the house feel alive. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked one morning. Selena hadn't expected the question. She paused, her hands still on the dough she was kneading. "On my own. Books, trial and error, and a lot of stubbornness." Adrian smiled, a small smile, but genuine. "Stubbornness is a good teacher." The conversations began to extend, first just about the week's menu, about Melanie's preferences, about non-existent allergies, but then gradually about bigger things, about Seattle in winter, about books they'd both read, about how hard it is to start over when you lose something that defined who you were. Adrian spoke little about his wife, but when he did, it was with a quiet respect, an old pain he carried with dignity. "She died bringing Melanie into the world," he said one night, his voice low. "And I spent 7 years not knowing whether to be grateful for my daughter or blame myself for not being able to save them both." Selena said nothing. She just reached across the table and touched his hand, a brief touch, but one that said, "I understand the weight. I carry my own too."
Dinners became rituals. Melanie would talk about school, about her friends, about the drawings she'd made that day. Adrian would comment vaguely about business, but always asked about Selena's day, and she, initially reluctant, began to share. About the restaurant she'd lost, about the years building something from nothing, about the fear of never being able to do it again. "You will," Adrian said with a certainty that surprised her. "I don't know how yet, but you will. You have too much talent to stay still." And then, with a corner-of-the-mouth smile that made something vibrate inside her, "And in the meantime, you're stuck with me in this little pest here." Melanie protested, laughing, throwing a pea at him. The scene was so absurdly domestic, so family, that Selena felt her chest tighten. Nights were quieter, but charged. After Melanie went to bed, Adrian and Selena would stay in the living room, he with whiskey, she with chamomile, the fireplace crackling between them. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence of people learning to trust each other's presence. Sometimes Adrian read reports. Sometimes Selena leafed through cookbooks. But always, at some point, their eyes would meet. And always one of them looked away first, too quickly, too aware, because they both knew that something was changing, that the line between gratitude and something else was becoming dangerously thin. And then, one night, after an especially good dinner, a mushroom risotto with truffle that left even Adrian speechless, he stopped in the kitchen doorway while Selena washed the dishes. He stood there, just watching until she noticed and turned around, her hands still wet. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. Adrian hesitated, and then, with a vulnerability she'd never seen in him, "The taste of your food, it made me feel again. Made me want to live again. And I don't know if that scares you as much as it scares me." Selena stood motionless, heart racing, breath caught, because she knew exactly what he was saying and because she felt the same thing. And the question that hung in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore, was, now what?
The letter arrived on a February morning, delivered by a messenger in an impeccable suit who handed over the envelope as if it were a sentence. Adrian opened it at the breakfast table, while Melanie finished the last sips of her hot chocolate and Selena tidied the kitchen. She saw the change in him immediately, the way his shoulders tensed, how his jaw tightened, how his eyes scanned the lines with an expression that mixed anger and exhaustion. He said nothing, just folded the letter with excessive care and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. But Selena knew something had changed. Something bad was coming. "It's her family," Adrian said later, after Melanie had gone to school. He stood at the living room window, hands in his pockets, looking at the city without really seeing it. Victoria's mother, Eleanor, she wants to see Melanie. He paused, his voice growing more tense. Actually, she wants to evaluate whether Melanie is being raised properly, whether the environment here is, appropriate. Selena felt her stomach sink. She didn't need to ask what that meant, didn't need to hear the words to know that she was the problem, the intruder, the woman with no acceptable past who had dared to occupy a space that didn't belong to her. "When?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt. 3 weeks from now. She's coming from Paris." Adrian turned, and there was something fierce in his eyes. "But that doesn't change anything, Selena. Nothing." But it did change. Of course it did. In the following days, tension settled into the house like an invisible fog. Adrian became more distant, more absorbed in calls with lawyers, tense meetings in his office. Henry Wallace, his trusted attorney, appeared several times, a middle-aged man with a perpetually worried expression and a briefcase full of documents. Selena heard them talking in low tones, catching stray words: custody, precedent, public image. She tried to maintain the routine, prepare meals, play with Melanie as if nothing had changed. But inside, the fear grew. That old, familiar fear that everything she had built, all that fragile sense of belonging, was about to crumble. Eleanor Whitmore arrived with the pomp of someone who knows her presence makes an impact. Tall, elegant, her gray hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, blue eyes sharp as blades. She entered the penthouse as if inspecting a property for sale, evaluating every detail, every corner, looking for flaws. Melanie ran to hug her because children haven't yet learned to detect poison beneath politeness, and Eleanor returned the embrace with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My darling girl, how you've grown." And then, turning to Adrian with courteous coldness, "Adrian, the house is different." It wasn't a compliment. Selena was in the kitchen but could hear everything. And when Eleanor entered, followed by Adrian and a younger woman carrying a clipboard, clearly some kind of assistant or evaluator, the look she cast at Selena was pure disdain.
"And you must be the help?" Eleanor said, the word loaded with something poisonous. Selena kept her posture straight, her hands clean on her apron, her voice calm. "I'm the house chef, Selena Swanson." Eleanor arched an eyebrow, as if this confirmed some suspicion. "I see. And how long have you been employed here?" The emphasis on the word was deliberate, designed to diminish. "A few months," Selena answered, refusing to lower her gaze. Adrian stepped forward, his voice firm. "Eleanor, Selena is part of this family. She takes care of Melanie, keeps this house running, and took my daughter's place with impressive speed," Eleanor cut in, her voice cold as ice. The silence that followed was brutal. The next few days were a silent nightmare. Eleanor settled into a nearby hotel, but spent hours at the penthouse, watching, asking questions, taking notes. The assistant interviewed Melanie with false gentleness, asking about routine, about how she felt, about who took care of her. And then the investigators began their work. Selena didn't know initially, but Henry called her in for a private conversation, his face somber. "They're digging into your past. Eleanor hired an agency. They've already found out about the orphanage." Selena felt the ground open beneath her feet. "I was 13 when my parents died. I spent 2 years there until I got emancipated and found work. There's nothing wrong with that." Henry sighed. "I know. Adrian knows, but Eleanor is going to twist it. She'll say you have a troubled history, instability, that you're not suitable to be around her granddaughter." Selena looked out the window at the city that had promised new beginnings and now seemed about to take everything from her again. She thought about Melanie, about how the girl ran to hug her every afternoon, how she asked to help in the kitchen, how she'd started calling her Lena with that sweet intimacy of someone who loves without reservation. She thought about Adrian,
about the silent dinners that had turned into deep conversations, about the looks that lasted a second too long, about the hands that almost touched but never quite did. And then she thought about the hardest truth. Maybe they're better off without me. Maybe I'm just bringing trouble to people who've already suffered enough. The fear of not being worthy, that old fear that had haunted her forever, began to whisper with renewed strength, "You don't belong here. You never did." And one night, after a tense dinner where Eleanor made veiled comments about certain people who take advantage of others' kindness, Selena made her decision. She waited until everyone was asleep. She packed her small suitcase, the same clothes she'd arrived in, nothing more. She left a letter on the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she wrote, "Adrian, you and Melanie deserve peace, and all I'm bringing is storm. Thank you for everything, for reminding me who I was. Take care of her. S." She looked one last time at that kitchen where she had found herself again, at the living room where she'd learned that maybe she could still be loved, and then, with a broken heart but unwavering determination, she walked out the door, toward the train station, toward the unknown, toward the silent sacrifice she believed was love.
The train station was nearly empty at that hour of the morning. Selena sat on a metal bench, her suitcase at her feet, eyes fixed on the schedule board, blinking indifferently. Portland, 10 minutes. It was far enough. Far enough that Melanie wouldn't miss her. Far enough that Adrian could move forward without the burden of defending her. Far enough that Eleanor would win. Because some battles, Selena had learned, aren't worth the war. She pressed her fingers against the suitcase handle, feeling the worn texture of the fabric, and tried not to think about the smell of hot chocolate in the morning, about Melanie's smile, about the way Adrian looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Was it real? She wasn't sure anymore. Maybe it had just been a fantasy, a sweet interval in a life that had always been hard. And then she heard it. Her name, shouted. Not a whisper, not a contained call, but a desperate shout that echoed through the entire station, cutting through the morning silence like thunder. "Selena!" She turned her head so fast her neck cracked, and there he was, Adrian, running through the station with an urgency she'd never seen in him, his hair disheveled, his shirt half tucked into his pants, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart stop. Behind him, Melanie tried to keep up, holding Henry Wallace's hand, her little face streaked with tears. "Selena, don't!" Adrian's voice was hoarse, broken, and Selena froze, between the instinct to run and the desperate desire to stay. He stopped in front of her, breathless, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. And when he finally lifted his face, there was something there she'd never seen before. Fear. Genuine fear. Raw. Unguarded. You can't go," he managed to say, his voice trembling. "You can't just leave." Selena felt tears burn, but forced her voice to come out steady. "I have to go, Adrian. Don't you see? I'm in the way. Eleanor is right. I'm not suitable. I don't have an acceptable past. I don't have family. I don't have anything that proves I deserve to be near you. And I won't let Melanie suffer because of me." I swallowed hard, the words coming out like shards. "She deserves someone better. You deserve someone better."
Adrian took a step forward, and there was something fierce in his eyes now. Not anger, but determination. "No, Selena, you don't decide that alone. You don't decide you're not good enough." He took a deep breath, and then, with devastating vulnerability, "You think I don't know what it's like to feel like you don't deserve to start over? I spent 7 years believing I had no right to be happy again, that loving another person would be betraying her memory, that Melanie needed perfection, not a broken father trying to pick up the pieces." His voice faltered, but he continued. "And then you walked into my life, and you reminded me what it is to taste, what it is to feel warmth, what it is to wake up and want to live the day, not because you're perfect, but because you're real." Melanie broke free from Henry and ran to Selena, clinging to her waist with desperate strength. "Don't go! Don't go! You promised to teach me how to make chocolate cake! You promised!" Her little voice was broken with crying, and Selena felt her chest implode. She knelt down, holding the girl's face between her hands. "Mel, sweetheart, you're my mom!" Melanie shouted, with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "Not from my belly, but from my heart. The teacher said family is who we choose, and I chose you." The tears finally fell, hot, freed, inevitable. Selena pulled the girl into a tight hug, feeling the little body tremble against hers, and for the first time allowed herself to feel what she'd denied for months. She had chosen too, had chosen this girl, this man, this life. Adrian knelt beside them, and his hand found Selena's, firm, warm, real. "Eleanor is wrong, about you, about everything." His voice was firmer now, each word weighted with certainty. "I've already talked to Henry, already confronted Eleanor, made it clear that you're not going anywhere unless you want to go, that you're the woman I love, the woman my daughter loves, and if she can't accept that, then she's the one who'll have to reconsider her presence in Melanie's life." Selena looked up, eyes wide. You told Eleanor that?" "I did, in front of her lawyers, in front of anyone who wanted to hear it." A small but genuine smile touched his lips, and you know what? It was liberating. The loudspeaker announced the departure of the train to Portland. The doors opened. Passengers began to board. But Selena didn't move. She looked at the suitcase at her feet, at the train that waited, at the escape she'd planned. And then she looked at Adrian, at the gray eyes that held hers with a silent promise, at Melanie, who still clung to her as if letting go meant losing everything. And she realized, finally, that starting over wasn't about running away. It never was. It was about having the courage to stay, to accept being loved, to believe, for the first time in her life, that she deserved this. "I'm afraid," she whispered. Adrian squeezed her hand. "Me too, but we're afraid together." And as the train left without her, Selena stood up, not to flee, but to go home.
6 months later, the aroma of vanilla and chocolate filled every corner of the small restaurant Selena never imagined she'd have again. Taste of starting over. The name had been Melanie's idea, and Adrian had insisted it was perfect. The walls were decorated with family photographs, Melanie covered in flour, Adrian trying and failing to make a souffle, Selena smiling in front of the oven with that expression of peace she'd finally found. The place was small, cozy, filled with natural light streaming through large windows. And that Saturday afternoon, it was closed for a very special event. Selena stood at the kitchen counter, wearing a simple white linen dress, an apron over it because she had insisted on personally preparing the wedding dinner. Adrian was beside her in a white shirt and tailored pants, sleeves rolled up, helping with a clumsy dedication that made her laugh. Melanie, wearing a pink apron with her name embroidered on it, sat on the tall stool, licking a spoon of chocolate ganache with the seriousness of a professional chef. "It's perfect, Lena," she announced, raising the spoon like a trophy. "This is the best chocolate cake in the universe." Selena smiled, her heart so full it seemed about to overflow. "Good to know I have my official assistant's approval." Outside, in the small dining area decorated with wildflowers and candles, a few guests waited. Henry, who had become a true friend. Some former customers from the original restaurant who had sought out Selena when they heard about the reopening. And even Eleanor, who, though still maintaining a cautious distance, had accepted the invitation and sat in a chair near the window, watching the scene with an expression that, if not warm, was at least no longer hostile. Some battles aren't won, but some
with time and patience, transform into respectful truces. And that, Selena had learned, was victory enough.
Just as she discovered that love can change everything, each of us also carries that power of transformation within. It doesn't matter how many times life knocks us down, how much ash we need to leave behind, or how many times we believe we don't deserve to start over. Love, true, patient, courageous, always finds a way. And when we finally allow it in, when we lower our defenses and accept being seen in our vulnerability, we discover that belonging has nothing to do with perfection. It has to do with choice, with courage, with saying yes even when fear screams at us to run. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over and believe in love, that the right people arrive at the most unlikely moments, and that true family is the one we choose and that chooses us back. That the taste of a new beginning can be as sweet as the first sip of hot chocolate on a cold morning, and that sometimes the home we've searched for our whole lives was just waiting for us to have the courage to stay. If this story touched you, if it awakened something inside your chest, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Leave your mark, share your hope, because every word matters, and because stories like this need to be celebrated. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience in every episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, you'll find stories of people, of unlikely loves, of courageous new beginnings, and of endings that restore faith in the impossible. Because we all deserve to believe that no matter where we are now, there's always room for a new chapter, a chapter written with hope, affection, and the certainty that we are worthy of love. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here. Because as long as there are hearts seeking connection, as long as there are souls who dare to start over, there will always be a new story to tell. And who knows, the next one might be exactly what you need to hear.